Divisive, she snaps, sliding my blue folder back with two polished fingers, and in that sterile boardroom light I see everything at once. The principal's practiced poise and clipped smile, the coordinator's pen tapping like a small gavel of contempt, the administrative assistant arranging stamps like little no's, while behind my eyes plays the parade again, my grandson shrinking on the curb as a grown man's careless mouth turns a celebration into a bruise, the brass band blaring, confetti sticking to his damp cheeks, and me standing here now with old hands that smell of soap and paper, holding a plan stitched from porches, church basements, and voices that never make the program. They have badges, posture, and air conditioning on their side. I have scuffed shoes, a spine taut by grief, and a highlighted line in a policy they'd rather call a rumor. But hear me, before this night closes, the rules they bend will stand up straight, and the room that tried to shrink my boy will learn there is a measure they did not set, and a door they cannot close. One request before the next scene: subscribe, comment where you're watching, and share this story. Light spreads when we pass it on. Divisive, she says, and the word lands on my blue folder like a rubber stamp pressed by a cold hand. I'm standing at the edge of the board table with the weight of the afternoon still on my shoulders. The room smells like floor wax and dry paper, the kind of scent that clings to government buildings at the end of a long day. A portable fan hums behind me, pushing lukewarm air that lifts the corner of the agenda in a slow flutter. Fluorescent lights buzz in the ceiling, turning everyone's faces a flat, tired color. My folder is open, its pockets swollen with documents that I iron smooth on my kitchen table. A study plan that holds two dates in the same pair of hands, class schedules, letters of support, and a copy of the policy that I underlined with quiet care. My fingers rest on the folder's edges the way you rest them on a railing over moving water. She sits in the center seat, the principal. Her posture is a line, not a curve, and her pen taps to a private metronome. To her right waits the academic coordinator, the type who measures every syllable as if words require a permit. To her left, the administrative assistant lays out a tray of stamps in colored tabs, the small tools of small denials. The table is ashore, and everything on it is arranged for tidal control. Stacks of old minutes, a silver bell, time cards, and the microphone that hisses faintly even when no one is speaking. They called my item, and I walked forward with my heart steady, not fast. I thought of my grandson sitting in the back seat after the parade, his hands folded in his lap the way he does when he's trying to stay smaller than his feelings. I had promised myself I wouldn't come in here to shout or scar. I came to lift the policy up to the light and ask it to do what it says it can do. The room, though, has its own gravity. The clock on the wall moves in visible clicks. Each second sounds like a teacher turning a page behind you. Divisive, she repeats, and her tone pours the word into the minutes like concrete. No one looks at me, not directly. Instead, gazes slide to the agenda or to the cup of pens. The hum of the fan becomes a low engine in the corner of the room, steady and indifferent. I feel the hard plastic of my chair still in my back from when I was waiting, feel the grit of the carpet under my shoes, feel the heat of the paper where my palm meets it. I did not come empty. My folder holds a study mapped for a class that will hold two stories at once without forcing either to fold. Indigenous Peoples' Day and Columbus Day, set side by side, not to erase, but to listen. a plan of walking interviews, a circle protocol for class reflection, a schedule that gives time to both wound and achievement. I had taken it through the neighborhood with my grandson, collecting the small sounds of our street, a screen door thudding, a kettle hissing, a dog collar jingling, elders speaking names that don't fit inside a textbook margin. Those sounds are in my mind now, beneath the fan, beneath the fluorescent buzz.
The principal repeats the frame that often ends discussions before they start. She says this might be too much for the school right now. She says the climate is sensitive, the calendar already full, and the town divided enough. She speaks in phrases that sound like cushions, but feel like walls. The coordinator inhales sharply when he hears me mention community participation. The assistant slides forward a stack of forms the color of old mints and mentions a missing rubrica, a signature whose location is more legend than map. I keep my voice level and my eyes on the documents because paper is calmer than a face. I say the title of the plan out loud once, as if sending it across a river by its name could help it reach the other side. The paper edges whisper under my thumb. Each page has a memory. My dining table cleared of salt and pepper, a good pen borrowed from a friend, the light falling in a square on the floor and moving an inch every 10 minutes. When you have no power, you learn to honor the slow work of preparation. My wife taught me that before she left this world. Make the bed, brew the tea, label the file, know where your footsteps land. The coordinator leans forward, and I can smell his aftershave, something sharp that tries to call itself clean. He reads a line on the agenda and points to a slot that suggests we missed the deadline we did not miss. He speaks of policy like it's a mountain too high for neighborhoods to climb. The assistant highlights a line that says all submissions must include a certain stamp, then pats a small inkwell like a pet. She says the stamp today is not here. The stamp, she explains, lives at the district office and commutes like a person. The stamp, she says, is late. I think about late buses that never come, late promises that dissolve by morning, and late apologies that leave a stain instead of a clean space. I let the feeling pass through me, because if I grab it, it will drag me somewhere I don't want to go. I flip to the policy copy and let the highlighted line shine. The color looks like a thin strip of dawn on a winter road. I have kept one page on top, the one that names community participation not as a courtesy, but as a cornerstone. I know the section number by heart. I know where the commas are. I have learned to know where the commas are. My grandson sat at the kitchen counter while I read it out loud the first time. He didn't say much, but he sorted the pages into piles with the seriousness of a boy building a fort. He is not in this room, but I feel the little warmth of his help in my hands, the way a pocket knife warms after you hold it long enough. I set the policy page in plain sight, scented and steady, and I keep my gaze soft. The principal glances at it without moving her head, like people do when they don't want to admit they're reading. The coordinator clears his throat in a way that says he has questions, but also that the questions will not rise. The assistant writes the word pending on a sticky note and presses it down like she's sealing a letter to a place she'll never visit. I have been in rooms like this before, though not always with papers. I have learned the sound of refusal when it dresses up as a delay. I know the chill of air conditioning when it feels like a choice. I feel my pulse in my fingertips, not in my neck, which means I'm still steady. I hold behind my teeth the memory that brought me here, my grandson's face after the parade, a kind of stillness that felt like it had barbed wire wrapped inside it. I will not unwrap that wire with anger. I will unwind it with rules. The principal picks up her pen. She asks whether our plan was routed through a particular office, one I recognize as the end of many hopeful paths. I tell her which offices have seen the plan, which signatures we have gathered, and how each step aligns with the policy sequence. I keep my sentences clean, not heavy. Every time my fingers lift from the paper, I think they might leave a heat print, and I wonder what shapes officials see when they look down at the smudges the public leaves behind. The room shifts its weight. A trustee in the back adjusts his chair and it squeals lightly on the linoleum. Outside, a bus exhales air at the curb. Somewhere, a bottle rolls and taps twice against a wall. The fan's hum wobbles for a second before finding itself again. I feel how living things carry on, while people decide whether to let them be heard. The principal closes the agenda book with a muted thud. She says the word adjourn without saying that exact word. She speaks of schedules and safety and optics. She says the phrase for another time, which is the cousin of never. The coordinator nods as if an invisible conductor told him when to nod. The assistant reaches for a rubber stamp that is not there and, not finding it, offers a sticker in its place, a small circle the color of rainwater. I hold my ground, which is just a patch of carpet. My breath is slow. The page with the section number on it gleams faintly under the lights. The boy in the back of my mind steadies me. He is not my past, he is my present. I touch the folder's spine as if it had a heartbeat. I do not raise my voice. I do not sit down. I simply do not move. She reaches for my folder with 2 fingers, cool and practiced, and begins to push it back toward me. I keep my hand on the folder as if a small current runs through it, and when I feel her push, I let the folder slide only an inch before anchoring it again with my palm. The plastic gives a faint squeak against the wood. Around us, the room continues its quiet choreography. Pans tapping, paper sliding, the fan throwing a thin ribbon of warm air across my sleeves. The principal's eyes move on, but the push she gave me lingers like the taste of metal on the back of the tongue. It is not a shove you can photograph. It is the kind that dents you from the inside. Humiliations do not arrive with sirens. They gather like condensation on glass, bead by bead, until the whole window is blurred. The assistant retrieves a different set of forms, the color of a fading leaf, and places them within my reach with the care of someone setting a trap. She points, not with her finger, but with the corner of a binder clip, and whispers the words that have closed more doors than any law I know. Wrong version. The coordinator adds that our community walk recorded birthplaces and last names of the residents we spoke to, and if so, where the storage server lives. The principal wonders aloud if our plan might create friction with the district's existing commemorative calendar, even though our timeline starts after the dates in question. None of this is a brick wall. It is a hallway with 1,000 low doorways you must stoop under until your back forgets it was ever straight.
I don't stoop. I let the folder stay open like a small stage and keep my fingertips on the section number that matters. My skin remembers my wife's kitchen advice. When the pot starts to boil too hard, lift it off the burner for a second, but don't turn off the flame. I lift myself. I glance at the agenda only to note the order, then return to the page where the policy lives. The highlight band looks calm, not loud. The words under it are plain. They say communities are not ornaments on the edges of education. They are part of the table where learning is set. A soft buzz touches my thigh where my phone sits, and for a moment I am back on our street at dusk with my grandson. The sun had thrown red coins through the maple leaves. A neighbor stood on her porch with a mug steaming, telling us how the day on the calendar feels like a bruise and a prayer at the same time. We did not argue with her story. We let it stand the way you let a memorial stand. Farther down, a man with a plaster-dusted shirt told us about a grandfather who had crossed water with not much more than a name and a hammer. My grandson held the phone steady, his small brow folded in a concentration that made him look older. The recordings exist not to score points, but to make a cheer for one more voice in the room. Now, in this room, he is not beside me, but he is my counterweight. I feel the little courage he lent me when he organized the files on my laptop into folders labeled with dates and a shorthand only he and I understand. He tapped his pencil on the counter while I read the section out loud and wrote the number on an index card with careful digits. He is my ally, but not as a pawn. He is the reason I will not let this room decide today that listening is dangerous because it's hard. The coordinator speaks again, this time about sequencing. He says any study that touches 2 commemorations must be split into 2 approvals, one for each half. He says the halves must be presented in different months and that each half must demonstrate no overlap in materials. He says this as if a heart could be reviewed in separate chambers, first the right, then the left, with a gap of 90 days and a new application fee. The assistant adds that if the stamp arrives, it will only be valid for the original submission date, which, according to her spreadsheet, has expired. The principal rests her forearms on the table in a way that signals the hour is closing and the door wants to be a door. I accept the pace, but not the premise. I adjust my stance so my shoes plant fully on the carpet. I spread the index, the support letter, and the minutes from the last assembly so they form a modest fan under the glow. The teacher's letter carries the smudge of chalk near the signature, a physical honesty that makes me trust it more. The assembly minutes carry the careful handwriting of a person who learned to take notes in church, where precision is a kind of respect. The policy page carries the weight of a promise I plan to test with my whole name. Another small indignity arrives, disguised as tidiness. The assistant uses a pastel sticky flag to mark our folder as pending and places it on the corner as if she were labeling leftovers to be eaten later by someone who might not be hungry. The flag lifts and falls with the fan's breath. I watch it rise and sink like the chest of a sleeping animal. I do not remove it. I let it flutter and show itself for what it is. My phone buzzes again, once, short. I slide it up just enough to see the lock screen without breaking the room's spell. A message from my grandson sits above a photo he took of my hands holding the folder earlier at home. The message is simple, only a few words that say he believes in the plan we made. I picture him at the kitchen table, the lunchbox open, the pencil shavings like freckles on the wood. I tuck the phone back and let that belief brace my spine the way a backboard braces an old basketball court.
I need air I can't step outside to get, so I take the kind you can find while standing still. The smell of floor wax comes back, mixed now with the light sour note of a trash can that wants emptying. The fan hums and adds a barely audible rattle of a loose screw. The fluorescent tubes give off that faint electric warmth that raises the room's temperature by a degree, an important degree if you're trying not to sweat. I feel a bead on my neck and let it travel without wiping it away. I want to remember this physically, not just in a clean notebook way. The principal opens a binder with clear sleeves and flips to a printed email that references something called a climate consideration. The phrase is vague enough to cover anything and specific enough to scare everyone. She places the email flat and lays her pen on it like a border. The coordinator checks a calendar and notes the crowding of test dates. The assistant begins a list of follow-up items that starts to look like a staircase with no landing. I recognize the structure, the no that wants to be mistaken for a careful yes. I open the folder further, so the crease rests flat. The section number shows like a small lighthouse through fog. I raise nothing but the policy page with its highlighted line and the attached index. I breathe through my nose and taste the paper dust that lives in public rooms. I think of my grandson's quiet after the parade, and how quiet can harden into something you carry like a rough stone if nobody gives you a place to set it down. This study, these pages, this simple blue folder are the table where that stone can be placed without being thrown. The principal nods to the next item on the agenda, as if to move us along. The assistant reaches for my folder again, 2 fingers poised to slide it to the corner and give the pending flag a new home. The coordinator taps the table twice with his pen, the sound of a period meant to end a sentence I have not finished. My pulse ticks a little louder in my ears, but my hands stay cool. I draw the policy page a fraction closer to the center, not as a fight, but as gravity at work. I will not repeat the section number out loud yet. I will not cite it like a weapon. I will let it sit in the light where anyone can choose to read it or choose to look away. I prepare the email to the address listed at the bottom of the policy, the one for supervisory review when a process stalls. I attach the index, the letter, the minutes, the schedule, the community accounts labeled as listening materials, and the photograph of the section itself. I add the date of my first submission, the time of my arrival today, and the note that the public portion of the meeting is still in progress. I pause, touch the folder spine again, and hit send. The phone in my pocket begins to vibrate. I slide the phone out just enough to see the screen brighten against my palm. The message preview blooms like a small light. Receipt confirmed. A second later, a new line appears that my eyes catch even before my mind agrees to read it. En route. The fan breathes across my knuckles. The principal continues to speak as if the room were a train with no brakes, but a ripple moves through the back row, a shifting of chairs, and a cough that sounds like surprise, trying to be polite. I tuck the phone away and feel its tiny heartbeat continue against my thigh. The index on the table looks steadier than I do. I square it to the edge. The door at the side opens with the soft weight of an oiled hinge. The supervisor steps in without ceremony, not marching, not apologizing, just entering like a measure of time that belongs to the clock more than to any person here. He carries a leather folio under his arm, and when he sets it down, the table receives it with a small, solid thud. The fluorescent light gives his glasses a thin stripe. He nods to the principal and asks for the agenda copy. She slides it over, a gesture neat enough to count as respect and distant enough to be its cousin.
Hair changes. Not colder, not warmer, but organized. Papers have a way of behaving when they know someone will actually read them. I feel my shoulders drop half an inch and then lift again because I remember there are 100 ways for a process to look fair while it learns how to fail. I keep the folder open like a boat you never beach too early. The assistant straightens the stack of mint forms with a brisk tap that sounds nervous in miniature. The supervisor scans the agenda, draws a line with his finger to our item, and asks for the supporting documents on record. His voice is even, the kind you could lean a sentence against without worrying it will slide. The principal gestures toward my folder with an open hand, and for a second, my chest flickers with something like gratitude. Then I see the way her fingers stop just short of touching the paper, as if it were a hot plate, and she already decided how long to hold her hand above it. I push the folder forward until it sits in the center of the table. My palm leaves a dry warmth on the plastic that fades as soon as it meets the room. I state the components without decoration: index, schedule, policy excerpt, community accounts, teacher letter, assembly minutes. The supervisor nods once at each item like he is counting in a language he has used for years. He opens the folder and the spine creaks in a way that makes me think of my front gate at home, that steady hinge I oil every spring. Humiliations do not stop when someone official enters. They learn new shapes. The assistant reaches into a drawer and produces a ruler to align our papers as if straight edges could fix what the last hour bent. The coordinator stands, circles to the other side of the table, and positions himself so he can see both the supervisor's pen and my face at the same time. He wears the look of a person preparing to offer questions labeled as clarifications. The supervisor flips to the policy page and stills there. The highlight band glows like a stripe of old honey under the lights. I recognize the pause of someone reading with his full attention, not pretending. He places the folio open beside the page and makes a small note on a clean sheet without yet looking up. The room listens to the sound of the pinpoint scratching, a domestic noise in a public place. My grandson sends another message. The phone trembles once against my leg, and the preview shows a photo he took of the neighborhood map we sketched together on butcher paper. Corner store, clinic, church basement, Nations Park, bus stop, the mural with the handprint border. He adds a single line that says, "Remember the map when they try to make the room smaller than the street." I do not open the thread. I let that one sentence nest at the top of my thoughts like a bird that knows when to keep still. The principal clears her throat, the preamble to a reframe. She notes that while community participation is valuable, the district has evolving guidance regarding projects that may be perceived as polarizing. The word evolving moves across the table like a fog, finding corners to sit in. The coordinator produces a thin sheet from a separate folder, a printout so fresh the toner smell carries a bit of warmth. He calls it an exception memo, a provisional interpretation ahead of formal adoption. He says it quickly, so the sentence carries momentum like a rolling cart. A small humiliation slips under the door like a draft. The assistant writes the word provisional on a sticky note and anchors the alleged memo with it, as if the glue could grant legitimacy. She aligns the note with care. The note does not make the paper heavier, but it tries. The supervisor holds out his hand for the memo without changing expression. He reads, mouth still, eyes moving. The fan ticks once as its metal cage shifts in its bracket, a tiny mechanical throat clearing. I steady my breathing and watch the lines on his face remain unreadable in a way that gives me room to keep standing. My wife's voice moves through me with that same old kitchen cadence. Don't hurry the truth just because someone else is late to meet it. I remember lifting the policy page to the window at home to see if the highlight bled through, as if light could reassure me that rules on paper still knew how to be rules in practice.
The teacher's letter peeks out from under the index, chalk dust faint near the signature. The assembly minutes, written in careful lines, carry the ache of hands that have taken notes for years in rooms like this. I tilt both pages so the supervisor can see the headings without being offered them. I don't present them like exhibits. I set them like bread. Oppression accumulates by exhausting the body one small item at a time. The coordinator asks the supervisor whether the section requires principal approval prior to community input or allows parallel preparation. He phrases it as curiosity and folds his hands in a steeple that points at the ceiling's cheap tiles. The assistant wonders if the community accounts collected on walks constitute data under the new privacy guidance, and if so, whether they need to be sealed. Her voice is not unkind, which in some ways makes it sharper. I let a breath widen in my rib cage.
I think of my grandson's hands braced on the kitchen counter while he listened to an elder tell him that dates can be both doors and mirrors. I think of the man with the plaster-dusted shirt pressing his palm to the map and whispering that his people built stairs and sailed them into the land. The phone stays still now, spent for the moment, and I carry that stillness into my stance like a brace. The supervisor asks for the date of our first submission, and I answer with the exact hour because I wrote it on the back of an envelope and then copied it onto the index so the envelope wouldn't have to do all the work alone. He nods once and circles the date on his note. He sets the exception memo beside the policy page, not on top of it, a geometry that feels like a sentence without words. The principal folds her hands and watches the space between the two papers as if it might choose a side by itself. I notice the smell again. Floor wax layered over old coffee, a cord warming where it snakes to the power strip, toner ink breathing lightly from stacked copies a row back. A kid outside laughs and the sound sneaks in under the door sweep. A reminder that life does not pause while adults argue the terms of its permission. The clock advances with that little plastic clack it makes at the top of each minute. I feel each click as a tap down my spine. The supervisor lifts his eyes to the principal and asks about the origin of the exception memo. Not just who printed it, but who authorized it, where the distribution list lives, and whether the board acknowledged it in any published minutes. His voice is still an even tool, not a blade. The assistant's pen hesitates mid-air, the way a bird does when a window becomes sky and wall at the same time. The coordinator says the memo was circulated informally to leaders. The supervisor waits a beat long enough for that adverb to show its seams. I remind myself not to feel victorious at a pause. Pauses are not doors. They are breaths. I keep my palm flat on the table and listen to the soft groan of the chair under a trustee in the back as he leans forward, finally paying attention in a way that makes the air change shape. The teacher adjusts her papers, a gentle rustle like dry grass, and the consigliera veteran, whose patience has fed many meetings, lets out a long, slow exhale that sounds like a hand smoothing a wrinkled sheet. The principal shifts and offers a new framing. Because tensions in the community are high, administrative discretion must err on the side of protecting cohesion. The word cohesion carries the sugar of good intent and the grit of erasure. The supervisor returns his gaze to the policy page, taps once right next to the section number, and then runs his finger down to the line that names community input as a built-in, not an add-on. He does not say the words out loud. He lets the room sit with the shape of what's printed. A small ache gathers behind my right shoulder blade, the way it does when I stand too long in a posture that asks the muscles to remember youth. I think of my wife's hand pressing there once while I washed dishes, the warmth flowing into the knot until the knot lost interest in being a knot. I want that hand now and settle for memory of it. I straighten but do not stiffen. The folder's spine rests on the wood like a piece of weathered rail.
The assistant slides a glass of water toward me. It stops half an inch from my papers, catching a beam and throwing an oval of light onto the policy page. The water tastes a little like the pipes and a lot like kindness trying to find its way without permission. I set the cup down where its condensation won't touch the ink. I hear my grandson's voice in my head, counting the steps we drew on the map. Listen, record, label, share, reflect, revise, report. He said 'em like a chant. I say 'em silently now to keep my center from drifting. The principal reaches for the exception memo again, positions it square with the table's edge, and nudges it toward the center as if proximity could grant power. The paper whispers over the wood. The highlighted policy line does not move. The supervisor's pen pauses above his notes. For a full second, the room stops pretending this is about scheduling. The principal slides the memo the final inch and says that under this exception, our study cannot be taken up here tonight. If this moment speaks to you, like it, comment your view, and share. Each click invites another witness. The sentence lands, and for a moment, the fluorescent hum is the only sound I can hear. Then the supervisor asks, quietly but clearly, for the source of the exception. He does not lean forward or sharpen his tone. He simply names the need: author, date, distribution, acknowledgement. The words take up their own space, the kind that makes papers behave. The principal lifts her chin a fraction and gestures to the coordinator, who raises the thin sheet like a flag that hasn't learned its country yet. He passes it over. The supervisor lays it beside the policy page, not on top of it, and requests the transmission email. The assistant scrolls through her inbox on a district laptop. Keys click with a light, brittle music. She finds a message chain with no header banner, no policy number, no recorded vote. The tone ascent from the fresh printout seems louder now that the authority behind it is quieter. The supervisor asks for the last board minutes where anything close to this exception might be referenced. The assistant reaches to a binder, flips plastic sleeves, and stops at a page that doesn't contain the words anyone needs. What happens next is not dramatic, it is careful. The supervisor states for the notes that until the exception is formally adopted, acknowledged, and distributed with a number, it does not displace the policy. He asks that this statement be recorded in tonight's minutes. The trustee in the back, who is watched like a man listening to distant thunder, leans forward and says he hears the request. The air shifts. The fan breathes over the table, nudging the sticky flag on my folder so it flutters and then rests. He asks that the highlighted section be read into the record. The principal glances at the clock, then nods to the assistant, who clears a throat. Her voice is soft but steady. She reads the line that calls for community participation as an integral component of projects touching civic commemoration. The words are plain enough that they don't need applause. They sit in the open and do the work of being seen. While she reads, I notice the condensation ring under my water glass stretching into an oval and then tightening back to a circle. A small physics lesson about how shape returns when pressure passes. He dictates a sequence the way a mason lays bricks, one, then the next, then the next. He asks that our index be entered into the meeting file as a reference table, that the teacher's letter be noted as support from instructional staff, that the assembly minutes be logged as prior community action, that the community accounts be described as listening materials rather than data collection. Each item finds a place without being asked to be more or less than it is. The assistant types, pausing only to confirm spellings. The keyboard clacks stack in even rows, like pickets going up along a fence line. He turns to the coordinator and requests a calendar window for a pilot, subject to the board's formal consideration later in the session. The coordinator opens his planner and traces a finger along the weeks after the commemorative dates. He suggests a 2-week span that does not collide with testing. The supervisor nods and says that the span is a proposal, not a decision, and asks for it to be captured as such. The principal watches the note-taking with the guarded posture of someone adjusting to a tide that doesn't answer to her shoreline.
He addresses the parade incident without naming names. He asks whether an incident report was filed and whether professional development on bias response has been requested. The principal says the report is in process. The supervisor asks that the timeline be noted in the minutes and that a contact for the training be listed so people can see where the thread runs. It is not a verdict, not a scolding. It is a line drawn on paper from one box to the next so eyes can follow it.
A secondary knot in my chest eases, not from victory, but from the recognition that the wound is not being treated as rumor. I adjust the folder so its spine lies straight with the table edge. The sticky flag still clings to the corner. I do not peel it off. It belongs to the story of tonight. The teacher beside me slides her letter a little closer to the center. Chalk dust freckles the margin. The flecks catch the light like distant moths. The consolera veteran sits with her hands folded, the way people do when they've decided to let the process speak and keep their breath for the walk home. The supervisor asks to confirm receipt times for our submission materials. I supply them from the index and from the backs of envelopes I copied in careful ballpoint. He circles the numbers and adds a small hash mark next to the earliest date. He looks to the principal and states that any claim of lateness cannot stand against the timestamps already in record. The principal agrees with a nod that costs her something and pays something back. The room absorbs this without a sound. The fan ticks once. The clock advances. My phone does not buzz, but I feel the echo of my grandson's last message in my pocket. Remember the map when they try to make the room smaller than the street. I look at the policy page, the letter, the minutes, the schedule, and I see the streets again. The corner store with its sun-faded posters, the clinic's waiting room chairs in 2 blues, the church basement with its scuffed linoleum, the mural with the handprints reaching into a sky of paint. The room does not feel smaller now. It feels contoured to something larger than itself, like a sleeve rolled up to let the arm do its work. The principal asks, almost formally, how the listening materials should be housed. The supervisor says they should be stored where public submissions live, with a descriptor that clarifies consent and purpose. He recommends a simple cover sheet stating that the clips are community voices offered for educational reflection, not for adjudication. He asks that the school designate a staff contact for receiving additional materials, and that the name be posted on the front office bulletin board and the website. The assistant writes the instruction on a list labeled action items and underlines it once. The coordinator brings up the issue of sequencing again, this time less like a gate and more like a checklist. The supervisor proposes what he calls a braided schedule, 2 sessions that alternate focus without dividing the whole into competing halves. He reminds the room that integration is not the same as confusion, and that clarity comes from how you frame the sessions, not from how far apart you place them on the calendar. He asks the teacher whether the sequence is feasible. She nods and says the reflective circle can hold both threads without tangling them, if time is honored and facilitation is steady. Her confidence lands gently and stays. Subplots that were flapping in drafts begin to find their pens. The assistant confirms in the minutes that the stamp's absence cannot negate timely receipt of materials. She logs the supervisor's statement about the exception status and attaches the policy section to the file with a note that it was read into the record. The consolera veteran asks whether a community update can be scheduled after the pilot window to close the loop with those who shared their stories. The supervisor says the request is reasonable and asks for it to be recorded as a follow-up item assigned to the principal's office.
The principal's voice, when it returns, is tempered by the fact of the notes now sitting in front of her. She proposes that a draft outline of the pilot be prepared tonight for distribution to board members before any vote. The supervisor agrees and asks for the outline to include scope, objectives, facilitation norms, and a plain language paragraph describing why the study exists. He looks at me, not for permission, but for acknowledgement, and I nod. The outline is not a finish line. It is the bridge we've been pointing at since I walked into this room. I gather the papers into a neat fan and leave the policy page on top. In the corner of my eye, the sticky flag clings with less certainty, its adhesive tired from the fan's breath. I let it be. The room is quieter now, not because tension has vanished, but because the noise of avoidance has backed away. Outside, through the narrow window, streetlights blink themselves awake one by one. The light in here is still the bright kind that flattens faces, but it feels less like glare and more like a work light over a bench. The supervisor speaks for the record. The exception memo will be referred for proper review. The policy remains operative. Materials are received. Proposed pilot window identified. Outline requested. Action items assigned. Public minutes to reflect all of the above. He asks whether anyone objects to this summary of the present state. No one does. The silence that answers is not the kind that hides. It is the kind that holds. I close the folder gently, leaving the top edge open enough that the highlighted band shows like a small stripe a day. The chair under me sighs as if grateful to carry a lighter person than the one who first sat down. I take the glass and finish the last inch of water. It tastes less like pipes now and more like effort cooling. I press my palm to the folder's cover and feel no tremor. The evening outside is waiting, but I am still here, steady, while the room finishes writing down what it has finally chosen to see. The outline takes shape under the fluorescent wash, point by point, until it is a clean spine anyone can follow. Scope, objectives, facilitation norms, a paragraph in everyday language about why the study exists. The supervisor asks the assistant to display the policy section on the projector, and the line I underline shines 10 feet wide, steady as a ruler laid across the room. The fan hums in its bracket. Paper smells like itself again. Ink and fiber, not threat. When the outline is complete enough to breathe, the supervisor signals for the agenda to return to our item. The principal folds her hands over a legal pad and nods, not with warmth, but with acceptance that is no longer brittle. The coordinator straightens his tie and sets down his pen as if surrendering the little hammer he had been tapping against the day. Trustees shift in their chairs. The row of spectators leans forward with the soft rustle of jackets. The air carries the faint scent of someone's citrus hand sanitizer, clean and clinical, and it cuts through the older notes of toner and coffee. The supervisor reviews the sequence we built together, his voice an even beam. He names the materials in the record, the dates of receipt, the definition of the listening clips, the braided schedule, the request for a community update after the pilot. He sets the exception memo aside with a palm consciously neutral, the way you set down a tool that doesn't belong to the job. He asks for a motion to open consideration of the pilot under the guidance of the policy is read. A trustee speaks, another seconds, the little bell gives one clear tap, and the microphones behave. I can hear my heartbeat, not as a drum, but as a wooden metronome my wife once kept near her sewing machine. Steady, not rushing. The projector's fan adds a second layer of white noise that calms the corners of the room. The outline sits in front of me with my notes in the margins, words like balance, time, return, and a small star next to the line where community participation must be posted visibly. I think of the front office bulletin board with its layers of flyers and the push pins like small red berries holding them in place. I picture our contact name right there, an address where voices can land without bouncing.
The supervisor opens the floor for comments strictly on the proposal at hand. The principal speaks first. Her words are careful and bounded, acknowledgement without confession. She affirms that the school can host the pilot within the proposed window. that a staff contact will be assigned, and that training in bias response will be scheduled with an external facilitator. Each word is a small door opening in a long hallway. The coordinator adds that he will supply classroom support on the 2 focused sessions and ensure that materials are prepared in plain language. His tone is administrative, but the shoulders behind it are lower than they were. The assistant, reading from the action list, confirms that the exception memo has been referred to policy review and will not be used to block items pending formal adoption. Her voice does not tremble. The supervisor asks if there is any objection to entering those points into the record as commitments tied to the proposal. None comes. He nods once, then calls the vote. The trustees raise their hands in sequence, fingers crossing the glare into clarity. A count without meaning to, the way you count while kneading bread to keep the rhythm from slipping. When the last hand rises, a hush follows, the kind that comes after a muscle lets go. Approved. The word isn't said loud. It arrives the way rain begins, a fine shift that becomes a new fact on the ground. The bell taps again. The projector whirs down. Chairs creak as bodies move from forward leaning to upright. The outline in front of me stops being a draft and starts being a path. For the first time tonight, my chest feels full not with pressure, but with room. Consequences gather in the ordinary language of minutes. The principal's commitments become lines that will have to be checked against calendars and logs. The coordinator's assurances become assignments with names beside them. The assistant's action items carry deadlines measured in days, not seasons. The exception memo is no longer a quiet blade. It is a document waiting in a tray to be counted by a process it cannot rush. The supervisor instructs that the contact name for community materials be posted within a week and that acknowledgement slips be prepared for every submission received. He requests that the incident from the parade be formally logged to the district office with a training plan attached, not as a stain on a person, but as a prompt for better practice. He asks that these actions be read back before adjournment. The assistant types, the keyboard clattering into neat rows that sound like a fence finding its line. I let my hand rest flat on the folder. It is smooth and warm, a familiar object finely aligned with the room's architecture. I think of my grandson in our kitchen, pencil shavings in a soft crescent near his elbow, the map we drew together with the corners weighed by salt shakers. I think of the elder on her porch and the contractor with plaster on his shirt, and the way both of their stories now have a place to sit in this building without wearing someone else's name. The memory does not sting, it steadies. A chair scraped somewhere in back, and a cough near the aisle remind me that people are still here, waiting for the gavel's end, but knowing something ended already and something else started. The supervisor speaks for the record one last time on our item. He repeats the policy by number, the commitments, the timeline for posting, the expectation of the community update, the referral of the exception memo, the training request and report. He instructs that the minutes be archived in a way that the public can retrieve them without needing an internal code. The principal nods, and I see in the set of her mouth the private arithmetic of someone who has measured what it costs to resist and what it costs to yield. The coordinator writes the pilot window into his planner with a pen stroke that looks like a road laid on a map. The assistant prints a provisional outline for distribution to trustees and slides copies along the table. The paper is warm. The ink is faintly damp. It smells like work.
The bell taps the close of the discussion. People drift toward the door in lines that avoid touching. A trustee stops to thank the teacher for her letter with a short, practical sentence that doesn't ask for applause. The consigliere veteran gives me a nod that feels like the exchange of a baton, not a trophy. The projector cools down, its fan spins softer, then stops. The room settles back into its regular size. I breathe in the evening air that squeezes under the door and smells briefly of wet sidewalk in exhaust. I stack my papers in the order we built the path: policy, index, letter, minutes, schedule, outline. I slip the listening materials into a separate pocket and make a note on a yellow card to deliver copies to the new staff contact once the name is posted. My hand is steady enough that the letters stand up straight. The sticky flag on the folder's corner is loose now, its glue tied. I peel it off and press it onto my notepad as a reminder of what words like pending try to make permanent. At the edge of the table, the principal pauses. She does not offer platitudes. She tells the assistant to prepare the posting for the bulletin board and website by Friday and to route the training request tonight. The coordinator lifts his planner, meets my eyes, and taps the week we chose. It is not friendship that passes between us, but it is not ice either. It is the recognition that paper has become direction and direction has become task. When I stand, my knees speak in their usual voice, a small gravel that has never kept me from stairs. The chair leaves a shallow warmth where I sit. My palm leaves no mark on the table. The folder fits under my arm with the weight of a book you have read many times and still trust to teach you something new if you read it honestly. I take one last look at the projector screen. White now and blank, and I like it that way. A blank page is not absence, it is permission. Outside the room, the hallway holds the same posters from the parade, but they feel different under the fluorescent wash. They do not accuse, they request. On the cork board near the office door, there's a space where a new sheet will go. Community submissions, contact name, hours posted. I picture my grandson reading that name with his finger under the line the way he used to when he was smaller. I picture him dropping off a flash drive with the voices we carried back from our walks, and I picture those voices sitting in a folder where they are not evidence against anybody, but an offering to everybody. The supervisor passes me at the threshold with the folio under his arm. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. He has left behind the shape of what rules can do when they are asked to be rules. In the parking lot, a bus exhales and starts its engine. The sound is low and certain, as if the night itself decided to move forward. I stand on the steps with the folder hugged to my ribs and feel the old ache between my shoulder blades loosened like a knot that has learned a new story for itself. The sky is the heavy blue of a day finishing its job. Somewhere a kid laughs, high and quick, and it finds me all the way out here. Peace does not mean forgetting. It means putting chairs around the table and writing down who they're for so no one has to hover in the doorway. Past wrongs do not vanish. We face them and learn forward. A future worth living is built when respect, union, and contribution stop being slogans and start being the rules. If you stayed to the end, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me what you'd do, especially if it were your family. Until next time.